And let me just introduce that session. John McKeown, some people will have seen him yesterday lead a very powerful session where basically, again, we have the privilege of people disclosing things that are about vulnerability in order to demonstrate how much stronger you can be when you've got there. John has been a psychotherapist for 25 years, and he's worked with many individuals and groups. He's also co-authored or co-wrote the self-help autobiographical book Being Gaza, My Journey to Hell and Back with Paul Gascoigne. He's worked a lot in prisons, rehab centres all over the world, but he is also one of several men who helped think through this festival with me, for which I'm very grateful. We're very grateful. He's going to be in conversation with Alastair Campbell, first of all. Is that a need for an introduction? I'm not sure. Alastair's been really part of the central debate around democracy, communication, media, and the role it plays in the balance of politics. And then himself is an accomplished writer. He's published many books. He's written 10 books in the last 7 years, including 6 volumes of diaries, 3 novels, and a personal memoir on depression and the pursuit of happiness. And his 3rd novel, My Name Is, published in 2013, tells the story of a young girl's descent into alcoholism. And he's an ambassador for Alcohol Concern. After John talks to Alastair for, I think, 15 minutes or so, he's then going to invite to the stage Chris Difford. Chris Difford is a musician, lyricist, a Novella Award winner, and he co-founded the band Squeeze, along with Glenn Tilbrook. And Squeeze had 16 albums and 3 critically acclaimed albums that are Chris's alone, countless top 10 hits, 52 American tours, 50 UK tours, variety of global tours under his belt. You must have a toilet full of awards. And obviously, he's still one of our most respected songwriters. So I'm going to hand over to John now to take the stage with Alastair, and then Chris is going to join. Thanks, John.
Is this sound on okay? Yeah. Thanks very much, and thanks to Carla for a great session. It was really powerful. As has all the sessions been, I've been fortunate enough to be here for the whole weekend. And you know, the whole thing about, like people have said, is trying to tell the truth, and that's what very much this session is about. Is sort of what stops us sometimes, what stops men from telling the truth. And I mean that in all areas, actually, in terms of whether you see something going on in the office that is perhaps not okay, or when we get to a stage in our lives where we know we need help, or something isn't happening, you know, something isn't working anymore, and what we do then, how we reach out for help, what does that take? What does that take in ourselves, and perhaps what does it take in kind of in terms of the community? That's perhaps a question we'll look to later on. But you've obviously had a very amazing career, and maybe you just start a few minutes just telling us maybe even where you're at now, actually, and obviously perhaps touch on, like we said there earlier at the table, is when you've had to reach out for help, when you've had to sort of say, okay, I can't do this anymore, or with your drinking and your depression in particular. So start wherever you want, really.
Where am I now? Oh, God, that's complicated. What I say is that I split my life now between writing, speaking, consultancy, charity and sport. And that is all true. I try and do some of that every day. I write something every day. I speak. I do consultancy because that pays the bills, and I do charity because that makes me feel better about how much I earn doing the consultancy. And I do sport, both watching and doing, because that. And I suppose that, you know, I mean, it's 10 years now, 11 years nearly since I left Downing Street, and I'm amazed that I've found myself in a position where I don't want a job. I actually like the freedom that I've got. I like the fact that I can spend more time doing what I want to do and doing what my family wants to do, but I can also hopefully make a difference in in different ways. I mean, the stuff that, of all the things I've done since I left, funny enough, the things I've enjoyed most, Jude mentioned the novels. I actually really, really enjoyed writing those, and partly because they've taken me into a new campaigning space, which is trying to campaign to break the stigma and the taboo surrounding mental illness down. So that I really enjoy. I've really enjoyed just having that freedom that you talk about. But the fact is, what I've not enjoyed, excuse me, is discovering, as if I didn't know, that just because you've left a situation where you might think it's a kind of laboratory for getting depressed and getting down and getting fed up and overwork and stress and all that stuff, that actually that's just kind of part of who I am. So on your point about when do you reach out, I mean, I sort of had no choice in a way, because I grew up, went to school, went to university, got into journalism. I'd lived in a lot of heavy drinking cultures through my life, and that was just what I did, really. And I'm not one of those ex-drinkers who sort of bemoans a wasted life. I used to love it. I used to love getting drunk. I used to love the crazy things it made me do and all that. But it couldn't go on. And so I just had a complete and total breakdown. And I had, so, you know, I didn't actually reach out. I got hospitalized. It was in the hospital that I realized you don't usually end up in places like this without a reason. And fun enough, it was a guy. The reason why I've never ever been embarrassed talking about this is because of the moment of realization was when this psychiatrist, I'll never forget him, in fact my first novel I dedicated to him, it's called Ernest Benny, he's now retired, he lives in Paisley, and he was the duty psychiatrist at this hospital in Scotland. And when I got arrested, the police took all my possessions away because I'd left them all sort of lying around on the floor. I won't tell you the story because it's kind of takes too long, but all my possessions were there. And he said to me, I noticed that you keep a diary, which I always have done. It's turned out to be a very good investment in my life. But, and he said, do you record what you drink? I said, no, why would I do that? He said, well, I'm just asking you. He said, do you record everything you do and where you go? I said, well, generally, yeah. So he asked me, he picked a day and he asked me to go through what I'd drunk that day. And it was, I mean, this will sound ridiculous because I'd been drinking like this for quite a long time. This is the first time my rational mind confronted itself with the thought that I might have been drinking too much. I'd had loads of people telling me I'd been drinking too much. I'd had my partner, Fiona, sort of telling me every day. I'd had people at work warning me, and you just push them back. You literally live in denial of it. So I go through the day, which started with me waiting for Fiona to go out for a swim, which she does every day, so I could go to the toilet and throw up. That's quite an abnormal thing, but it had become normal. I then felt better. I get in a cab. In the cab, I'm going to work, and I'm thinking, when can I have a drink? Oh, no, I'm seeing him at 12 o'clock. That'll do. That's all right. 12 o'clock's all right. That's the afternoon. Get into work, do a bit of work. Actually, once you get to 20 past 11, you think, well, it's nearly 12 o'clock. So what's the difference between 12 o'clock and 11:20? Into the pub, have a few, jacket on the chair, go back in. Then I had lunch. Remember David Mellor, politician? I had lunch
Chelsea fan.
I had lunch with David Mellor. So the psychiatrist said, how much do you have to drink? I said, probably about 4 bottles of wine between us. He says, how much did you have of that? Probably 3. Okay, did you go back to work? Well, yes, but there's a drinking, it was before 24-hour licensing, there was a drinking club that I knew. I used to go there in the afternoons. I went there, had a few, went back. Anyway, I'm suddenly this penny's dropping. And it dropped. Now, why did it take that? Why did it take that moment of crisis, which it was for me, to make that penny drop? Answer, because we can always persuade ourselves that actually what we're doing is normal. And that's what I did.
Did many, you mentioned Fiona, did many other people say, come on, you've got to get this in now, you've got to rein this in a bit? Did people literally confront you?
Well, you've got two things. You've got two things. You've got the people who say that, and you've got the people who actually say this isn't a problem. And the reason they're saying that is because that's their life as well. I found when I got back from hospital, I'll tell you what, the thing about employment is so important in this. How attitudes of employers is fundamental here. I'd left the Mirror to go to Today newspaper. My editor at the Mirror, Richard Stott, was really, really pissed off with me, really pissed off. But he was one of the first people to phone me. And he said, this was about, I don't know, a few weeks after I'd got out of hospital, and he phoned up and he said, literally, he said, "I hear you've gone mad." I said, "Well, yeah, I'm not very well." He said, "Well, listen, I'm telling you something. I can't resist saying I told you so I'm going to say that, but let's get out of the way. I told you so. Here's what I think you should do. Take the money there while you're on the sick, and as soon as you're fit, come back here." Now, that was an amazing thing for me, because that was basically him saying, I don't see you as a drunk. I don't see you as an alcoholic. I don't see you as somebody in a psychiatric hospital. I see you as the same person that I saw when I hired you because I thought you were good at your job. And that was an amazing revelation for me. Now, a lot of people don't get that. A lot of people are scared to tell their employer about how they feel. They're scared to say, I was at a conference the other day, a National Health Service nurse stood up, and she said, I was talking about all this kind of, let's all be open about our mental health. Let's be as open about mental health as we are about physical health. And she stood up and said, it's all very well for you. You're well known. You get loads of opportunity. You get people asking you to do stuff for money. I applied for promotion recently, and I was asked about my own health. And I panicked. Why did I panic? Because I have panic attacks. Why do I have panic attacks? Because that's something I've always had. Why did it flare up at that moment? Answer, she said, because I've never, ever, ever told anybody at work. She works in the health service. Now, that's the reality for most people. They can't be open. And I think that having that sense of being able to be open is really, really important. Now, because I was quite a well-known journalist, it was well-known in newspaper world. When I jumped to politics, people started to write about it, and I just thought, sod it, I'll be open. And once you've made that decision, there's absolutely nothing that anybody can do to you.
But did it take that crisis? We had a session yesterday similar to this, well, similar to some of this, which was, some people aren't able to, for various reasons, ask for help. They have to crash their car. They have to get arrested. Something bad has to happen
That's
usually.
to me, yeah.
But when you see others, and we were talking about a few people earlier, other people who are struggling, I mean, what do you do to help, if you like? What do you do now, especially with the knowledge you have?
Well, it's difficult, this, because I talk about this so much now. I mean, look, I was a spin doctor, not a real doctor, okay? But it's amazing how many people get in touch with me to say, I'm worried. Now, why they get in touch with me? Because they feel they can talk to me because they've heard me talk about it. That's fine, but I will always put them off to somebody who really knows what they're talking about. And I do. I know lots of people that I can hopefully match them up. It might be their GP. It might be somebody like you. It might be Alcoholics Anonymous. It might be Depression Alliance. It could be any, we all, I think, should do that. But I think the other thing that's really important, you see, I'm an atheist. I don't do God. But I do there but for the grace of God. And any time I see anybody selling the big issue, lying on the street in a sleeping bag with a dog on a string and all that stuff, I see the progression from where I was to where they've got to. And I think all of us need to understand that when you see that person, they didn't start there. They didn't start out there. They started as a child. They had parents. They had a background. They had a family. They probably had an education of sorts. A lot of them, they will have had a job. And then a series of things will have happened. And at every stage, something went wrong. They could have been helped, but it went wrong. And they end up, they're living on the streets. And a lot of them will die on the streets. And I think what all of us should do is not imagine we can change their lives all the time, because we can't, but at least have a bit of understanding about how they got there. And if there's something that we can do, we try and do it. So that if somebody does come to you and says, I've got a real problem, I'm struggling, which is often how people will express it, find out what the struggle's about, find out whether there's something that we can do to help them. And within the workplace, it's incredibly important. You see, and I think it was interesting to listen to Carla talk about, what it's like being a black person growing up in, and again, you and I can't identify. Well, we can think we can identify, but we can't actually, because we're white. We can't actually know what it's like to be a woman because we're men. But you can put yourself in the minds of other people through your own experience. You imagine what it's like being somebody who is mentally ill, really, really struggling with a mental health problem, but knowing that because of the norms of our society and because of the way we think about this, if they're going to be totally, completely upfront and open about that, the chances are it will damage them rather than help them. That's a terrible thing to feel. Or I'll give you another one, a woman I met recently who told me she gets really, really bad depression. When it's really bad, she can't get out of bed. Now, I know that. I've had that. You literally can't, even lifting your eye, open your eyes, lifting your eyelids feels like you're lifting a 10-ton truck, okay? You can't do that. Now, she said to me, whenever she feels like that, she feels so bad she can't phone in to work. So she tells her kids to do it. And she says to them, say that one of you is ill. So she's telling her, because she feels she cannot tell her boss, I've got really bad depression, she says, gets one of her kids to phone and lie about another kid to say that her mum's had to take her to the doctor. And then she says to that daughter, she says, by the way, you'll have to take a day off school. Even though she's not ill at all, why does she have to take a day off school? Because she's worried that somebody she works with goes to school to take her kid to school and sees that actually the kid's there. But hold on a minute, I thought your kid was ill, that's why you took time off. Imagine having to work out that sort of panoply of...
Well, I mean, again, you speak to a lot of people. You have influence. You have a lot of influence still. Not just you, but again, us, all of us here. How can we influence that? How again, I mean, it's hard to say exactly practically because each situation's different, but what can we do about this? What do you suggest?
Well, I think that the reason why events like this are really good and people understand the power of kind of dialogue and conversation and what have you, if you think about all the great waves of change in the world, right? So we've heard, in relation to something like, like issues to do with race. By the way, I don't think you can say that just because the Japanese got fourth place, it means there are only 12 black men, because I reckon there are about 30 Jamaicans who could beat the Japanese team. I just wanted to say that to you, Carl, okay? I want to see you afterwards, because I'm writing about this at the moment, and you said one thing that I really want to get into. But you look at, there's Nelson Mandela died, okay? While Nelson Mandela was in jail, lots of people said to each other, what can we do about this? And they did things. As they did it, a lot of the time you feel you're completely wasting your time. The guy was 27 years in jail. Well, 3 years into the Free Nelson Mandela campaign, you're thinking you're completely wasting your time. So you give up. A lot of people gave up. A lot of people didn't. If you take the whole women's rights movement, at various points, that has felt like it's going nowhere. And at the moment, you've got this whole, Jude mentioned the whole everyday sexism thing and no more page 3 and all this sort of stuff. That's part, I think, of a kind of new wave of feminism. So campaigning really, really can make a difference. And here's the thing, though. You can't always be sure when the difference is being made. And you've just got to hold on to that, because the one I often think about is gay rights, the film about Harvey Milk, the gay rights campaigner. So it starts with Harvey Milk and his gay rights campaigners being beaten up in the street, and it ends with him as a hero on the steps of Congress because they managed to get the law changed. Now, where did the change come? The change wasn't the law change, because, I mean, I know a little bit about how legislative change comes about. It usually comes as a response to change. Sometimes you can drive the change, but actually the change has happened on that arc. So along the way, millions of people have made that change happen. So when you say, what can we do? What you can do is think about this, try to understand it. I know you do, it's your life, but for all of us, you have to understand that even though you feel that you've got no power, actually you do. And people, the only way you make change happen is for people to say, I'm going to change this. And then you've got to get your head above the parapet, you've got to think it's worth spending time on, you've got to go out there and you've got to fight to change it. And there'll be setbacks on the way. But just to give you an example, since I'm not saying this is down to me, I'm saying this is happening, this is moving. I was at a thing last week with Nick Clegg. I mean, okay, I know he's only the Deputy Prime Minister, he's not the Prime Minister, and it would have been better if it had been Cameron, but there you go. Nick Clegg came out and made actually quite a good speech about mental health. Okay, now I can say to him, as I did afterwards, right, now can you go and get the money for it? Now can you go and make sure it happens? Now can you make the changes? But at least he's out there. Yeah. And, 5 MPs, here's the thing. People have got this figure, 1 in 4 people will have a mental health problem. Sometimes that is nonsense. It's 1 in 1. I mean, why, hands up here, anybody who has never had to see a doctor for a physical health problem, okay? God, seriously, never. You should be going and talk to Akala's Jamaicans and, But why do we assume that we don't have mental health problems from time to time? All of us have mental health. Why should it always be the same? Why is it always perfect? It isn't. So I think you've got to, in the political system, we were saying this over at the table just now, in sport, cricket, all these cricketers coming out and saying, I've had depression, I've got OCD, I've got a mental health problem, but you don't find people in sport willing or able to come out and say, I'm gay. In politics, it's fine to come out and say you're gay. In fact, you could argue that in some circumstances, actually, that might be an advantage to a politician to come out and say, I'm gay, right? But they can't come out and say they've got mental health problems. So why? Why can't we all just be open about whatever it is we are? The 5 who have come out, can anybody here name any of the 5 MPs who've spoken in debates about their mental health problems? 5 MPs, they've all come out. I've seen every single one of them since. And they've all said to me, best thing I ever did. Best thing I ever did. They worried about it. One of them actually said, Kevin Jones, he was speaking in the debate, and he said, I didn't come here intending to speak, but I've listened to these speeches and I feel I've got to speak. And sometimes that happens. And he says it's the best thing he ever did. And all the fears he'd had about people wouldn't understand, his constituents would think he was weak and all the rest of it, none of that happened. What actually happened was people have gone up to him and said, I'm really glad you did that because my dad's got a mental health problem and I feel I can't talk about it. My mum's mental, I can't talk about it. I've got depression, I can't talk about it. So the more that we talk about it, the more we work towards feeling that mental health and physical health, we should be open about both, we'll all be better.
Yeah. I've had the signal for the time, unfortunately, because it'd be great to go on, but we can't. But I'd like to ask you, because you're here, what you do, what you mightn't be able to answer this, so it's a long question perhaps, but it's just so, again, to give us something that you've done. When you wake up, when your eyes are heavy, when you think maybe of, we talked about suicides earlier, when we get into that space, what do you, Alastair Campbell, personally do? What are one of your strategies or strategies that help you get through that stuff?
Well, I don't like taking medication, but medication.
Yeah, it helps.
I had a really, really, really bad bout of depression, when was it? About 6 months ago. And I've been on antidepressants since. And the guy that I see wants me to stay on them for another 6 months. So they help. They do help. Sport, very, very important to me. Either every day I either run or cycle if I can. Obviously family, and I find, funny enough, one of the hardest things, because when I was working in Downing Street and it was very pressured, and I go on now about being open, I never saw a shrink.
Right.
The whole time. Never went to see anybody. My GP kept my medical records at his house because he was worried, and given the phone hacking stuff and all the rest of it, he was right to be worried, because he thought there was somebody who was trying to get my medical records. Now, actually, I wish I'd have just said, you know what, I don't give a toss if they get my medical records. I don't care. So openness has helped. Being open with my family has helped. And that's a difficult judgment to take. My daughter, for example, who's she's 19 now, but she's, but I can remember when she was much, much, much younger saying, why are you like this, when I was in a really bad, kind of very, very depressed. And that's a very hard thing to do, but actually it's a fair question for a child to ask, and I think you have to answer that. And she's, my kids, I think, have got very good attitudes towards mental health, and I hope it's partly because, I've been open about it. So I think openness, sport, medication, and the other thing is to have, everybody should have their own yardsticks. My yardstick is the day I cracked up. That was in some ways the worst day of my life, but I now look back and say, do you know what was the best thing that ever happened to you? That, if you hadn't have sorted yourself out from that, you wouldn't have done any of the things you've done. You wouldn't be broadly happy. I mean, the book that Jude mentioned was called The Happy Depressive. I'm basically happy, but I'm depressed. Now, that is kind of weird, but I have a great life. I've got a fantastic family. My football team is riding high. Life is all right. But it was partly, I think, because of that. And the idea, the other strategy, something bad happens, try and make it into something good, whatever it is. you know, and I try and do that. I try and practice that.
That's all we've got time for. Thanks very much, Alastair.
Thank you.
Okay. You want, yeah. You want to? And now I want to welcome to the stage legend Chris Difford. Thanks, Chris.
Good to be here.
You've just been
Hello.
testing, drug testing.
Drug testing. No chance.
I've known you for a while, and it's funny that, you know, in some way we're talking in this way.
Without me having to pay for it, you mean?
I asked Chris to do this, and he said, it's not going to cost me 120 quid, is it? Which isn't what I always charge, by the way.
No.
Just the rock and roll people. You've got an amazing story, and again, we obviously haven't got enough time to really to cover that and give it credit, but there's the sort of, like Alastair's describing, there was the kind of, maybe the one event or the events that kind of led to you seeking help. Can you just talk us through that?
That was it. Well, I guess my story was, you know, I was a teenager at South East London Boys' School, and you know, I was 15 years old, and I wasn't really interested in any of the subjects that were going on. But all I was interested in was music, and that was just, I just felt that instinctively that was the road that I was going to go down, even though my parents were dead against it. And my careers teacher was also dead against it. He said, you know, there's no chance of you being in a rock and roll band. And I said, well, I'd really like to be in The Who. And he said, I don't think there's any chance of that either. So I thought, well, sod you know, I'm not going to listen to that. And I took what I felt at the time was the easy option. And the people that I idolised when I was at school were people like Pete Townsend, who later became a friend. You know, he would talk about what a great job he had being in a rock and roll band, taking drugs and having women and private jets and booze and all that sort of stuff. I just thought, oh, this is definitely the job for me, you know. What else could you want in life? And then luckily I formed a band in 1973, 1974, and I was 17 years old. And from that day until the day I was 39 years old, I just drank and took drugs every day. And how did I ask for help? I didn't. There was an awakening. There was a presence, really. It was, if you don't look at yourself, you're going to lose all of this wonderful life that you've had. And I had almost lost it at that point.
What happened? I know it wasn't that pretty. I mean, what?
Well, the band Squeeze that I'm in, we were on our 30th American tour, and everybody was ready to go. Everybody was going to Heathrow, ready to catch the plane. It was like another 2-month tour. And I could just see down the tunnel the same old thing, you know, going, because I wasn't a very sociable drinker. I'd sort of order up everything in my room so that no one else could have it. So, you know, we get back to the foyer of the hotel, and everybody in the band go, yeah, party, you know, and they'd all go to the bar. And I'd go, yeah, I'll be down in a minute. And then I'd go upstairs, and that would be it. I'd be on my own, party of one. And I could see that all coming again, and I just thought, no, this is, you know, I've got a couple of kids, I've got a divorce, I've got bankruptcy, you know, something's beginning to tell me that this isn't really happening. And also, more importantly, I hadn't really grown up. You know, I was still 17. I hadn't understood what a man was, even though I was now 39. So I'd lost that connection, and because my dad was quite weak in a sort of masculine kind of way, which wasn't his fault, I didn't have that masculine connection. The only way I could touch masculinity was to hold a Telecaster guitar and be on stage like Pete. So I got carried off, went into rehab, and it was amazing.
What again, we haven't got enough time, but what have you learned through that process? And again, in terms of what we were talking about with Alastair, the sort of the internal things that we need to ask for help and support. Because even though, when people get sober and when they find the right doctor even, it's only the beginning of the journey of recovery. It's not like, great, I'm sober now. I mean, it's a whole new life, of course, isn't it, for many people?
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I've been sober 23 years now, and every day is like a brand new day to me. And I've suffered quite heavy bouts of depression in the last 10, 15 years. So even if, without the drink, there's still the brain. And the brain can suffer quite deeply in relationships or in a relationship with yourself. Being in the industry that I'm in is quite challenging as you get older, because it becomes less and less important to you. There are less and less returns for the work that you do and the amount of time that you are away from home. So I have to keep checking myself on a daily basis, and I'm very aware of the fact that the
You feel there's more to come from your life?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I wake up every day; it's a brand new day, and I just started writing a book a couple of months ago, and that was a real fantastic experience to understand my journey. And I've been working with a young band who are like 15, 16 years old. I've been mentoring them. They're called The Stripes. And by watching them grow up, I'm kind of seeing myself. So, they're going through the same dynamic masculinity problems that I had, like not talking to each other about issues, like if somebody stands, I was thinking about this last night, if somebody stands in front of you on stage, or if somebody stood in front of me on stage when I was like their age, I used to get really annoyed, but I wouldn't say anything, and I'd just stand at the back and sort of clam up. So my ego would sort of be introverted.
We talked earlier about groups and men's work, men's groups and stuff. Not that, well, you are influential, of course, but again, on the back of this, what can we do? I mean, I asked this question to Alastair. What do you think we can do? Do you feel the same thing? What you've talked about the music industry. We know it's rife with addiction and depression. Any sort of thoughts on that?
Well, the music industry doesn't really have a backup. It does in America. There's a funding that ASCAP in America have, so that if you've got a drink, alcohol problem or drug problem, you can get sponsored beds in America in rehabs. Here, the Musicians Union are very slow off the mark with that kind of stuff. The record companies, of course, do not give a shit. If you look at the Amy Winehouse experience, when she was ill, the head of Ireland at the time just couldn't get enough of the front page news because it was selling records, which was very sad. And we lost one of our greatest young writers and singers, which is very sad. So, unfortunately, the music industry here can't do much about it. I'm very fortunate, if I'm in a place where I need to speak, I go to a meeting, an AA meeting or NA meeting or a men's group. In the wide open world, there aren't that many opportunities for men or for women to go and sit down and share. I remember when I was growing up, my mum would have people around the house, mainly women, and they would sit and chat. And it was a really fantastic experience as like a little kid. All these women all sitting around talking about their problems and sharing their problems with them. And my dad would have people from the gas works where he worked. They would come round on a Saturday. They'd have a few beers and they'd talk. I don't really see that too much now.
Big question, but what, in that sense again, what do we need? A lot of people don't go to church anymore. There is a kind of, a real, I guess, not blaming social media or any of that stuff either, but a kind of a culture of, I want it and I want it now, and that whole kind of almost, I don't want to call it shopping addiction, that's another thing, but a whole thing of instant gratification Any thoughts on that?
I think it's like Alastair was saying, that really people have got to take the opportunity, if they believe enough, to get up and talk about it. It would be amazing for someone like Cameron, for instance, to talk about alcoholism in its true sense, and that how I think it's his sister who's an alcoholic, and he knows full well that with a bit more funding we could help people. And the rehabs are really impossible to get into because they're too expensive. Some of the workshops that I do in local free units are brilliant, but they're very few and far between. So I think if you feel strongly about it, you've got to get up and start a group, a men's group or a woman's group. Get up and just invite people around to your house and talk about your issues. But it takes a brave person to get up and start that sort of thing.
Again, I've had the signal for time.
Of course.
Again, this is a thing about music, really, and the influence of music on people, of course. Most of us, dare I say, all of us in the room will have a favourite song or a thing like that. Again,
Squeeze song, obviously.
The Squeeze song, Up the Junction, is mine, actually. It really is. So, any thoughts on, again, that? Not that you are going to go and write a song on the back of this, but
already have. I've begun.
Have you?
Yeah. It's called Twin Spirit. I just heard that word and I thought it was genius.
What Carla said.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, thanks very much for your time
you.
again, Chris. Thanks, Alastair. Thanks, everyone else. We're going to have some questions. Great. We've actually got 5 or so minutes for questions, or thoughts. Someone at the back with a big hand up there.
I'm just wondering whether, for both of you, and it's a connection with yesterday as well, that it's clear to me that sometimes when people are struggling with alcoholism or mental health problems, that their family carers, the people around them, know a lot about it, and they're trying really hard to help them. Do you think there's more potential or more need to do more to help the family carers who can then help the person?
Alastair?
Definitely. And I think I think Al-Anon is actually a very, very good organisation. You've got AA for the alcoholic, and you've got Al-Anon, which is essentially for the family. Because I think what happens with, I talked about being in denial. I think most people who get into addiction are in denial of the damage they're doing to themselves, and inevitably, because of that, they put themselves in denial of the damage they're doing to other people, and the damage is real. I mentioned that situation with a child. Well, how many kids are growing up today in families that are, with parents who are alcoholic, drug addicts? It's a lot of kids. So that's damaging them. So I think there's such, obviously the focus has to, in a sense, has to be, if you're a policy maker, if you're a government, you're a doctor, you're worrying about the person who's the alcoholic or the addict, whatever it might be. But the impact upon the broader family and the role that the family has in trying to help that person is fundamental. And I think that's, again, by not having this out in the open, we don't focus upon that, and that means that we don't do the right thing for them.
Thanks. Shaft there.
Hi there. Since it's being a man, is there anything specific about male depression and how you think that ought to be addressed?
Do you want to go, Chris?
Do you see it as being completely different from female depression then?
No, I don't. I want to hear you say it.
I just did. There's depression in my family, so maybe it's in a family, and it needs to be not enabled by other family members, because that's quite easily done. I know that when I was in full flight as an alcoholic, I was being enabled right, left and centre by very close people around me, because they wanted me in that kind of frame of mind. Ultimately, it was the thing that ruined the whole picture, so it was a mistake.
So you're saying family members have of course they want to help, like the question that was asked earlier. they don't always know how to help, but sometimes it's not in their interest to point her out either. Which is, because again, there's the whole thing about families and shame and you know, denying the alcoholic or denying the depression. I mean, is that what you said happened in your family?
Yeah, well, it's learned behaviour, isn't it? Well, you come home drunk and then you fall asleep and your partner at first is pissed off about it. Then you come home and you're drunk and you fall asleep and your partner's pissed off about it. And the third time she goes, oh, actually, I've got time for myself here. I can do something else. I quite like him being in this state. And you keep coming back and then suddenly you're drifting apart and she is enabling, or he is enabling you to do that. And so I think, as you said, Al-Anon is a fantastic place for people to go, even if you're not with a partner who's got alcoholism or drug addiction. It's a fantastic environment for people to go and share about relationships.
There's a guy over there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and it's very empowering and encouraging. And talking about power, a question about men and politics and power, and especially in relation to war. Men start wars, and men send soldiers to war, but often the victims are civilians and women and children. In relation to what Alastair was talking about, a couple of weeks ago, a friend of ours, Tuigi Garcia, tried to carry out a citizen's arrest on Tony Blair for war crimes. Given the fact that it's so empowering and it's so nice to face the truth and unburden yourself, do you think your former boss and friend should come clean about the Iraq war and unburden himself?
No. Well, the premise of the question, however elegantly and nicely put, actually, as somebody who knows Tony Blair and who was with him at the time that he made those decisions, you can have your nice round of applause, but I find it offensive. And so that's all I've got to say to you. And anybody else can ask anything they want.
Anyone else?
And if you want to come and do a citizen's arrest and get yourself in the papers tomorrow, you're more than welcome.
Andrew. Is the microphone over there, please?
This one's for Alastair Campbell. I'm curious, when you were at the height of your pomp and your power in number 10, and I've been told that portrayal of you on the thick of it is actually rather frivolous and playful imitation. What was your attitude? Do you think your attitude to women and work and at home and in your private life has changed since those days and since your illness and recovery?
I love the way that you clever guys assume such knowledge. You know about my private life, do you?
No, I don't.
Oh,
no,
good,
I genuinely don't. It was a genuine question.
Good. So what was the attitude
I know
that...
very little about you, actually.
You do?
I know very little.
Okay, good. Where should you go and buy the books? I think that, has my attitudes changed? No, I don't think they have, because I think I've always been the same person. I think your circumstances change. So I was very aware for the fact, in my attitudes to family, I was very aware of the efforts that I was trying to make to be a, quotes, good partner, good father, and I was also very aware of the tension within me that it's impossible to do that when you're doing a job that's taking up literally every single minute of every day. So my attitudes have changed in that now, if I have a choice about how I spend my time, that becomes much more of a factor within it. But I've never had a problem in my attitudes to women.
I think one more.
You know, we've been talking about addiction, and in a sense, I think the biggest addiction among men is to power. And it's, you know, I think it's really interesting hearing Alastair and Chris, because both of you occupied enviable positions in the world of men's power, when, you know, political power and all that meant, and the power of a rock star, which is like this fantasy level of power, and just to be able to move thousands of people with a wave of your pelvis, or, well, I guess that's Elvis, but anyway, but you know what I mean.
You wish.
You know, I wish. But this is the fantasy. But I think the thing about power, it's both very real in the world, but our individual experiences of it, there's an illusory quality. So we aspire to these things. And so both of you as men, it's very interesting hearing your tales, because there seemed to be a level where you had this very real position in the world, and very different positions, but very real, and yet at a personal level, it just can never satisfy. And so we know that among men, rates of alcoholism and other drug abuse are much higher in most countries than similar rates among women. And I think it has to do with this quest for certain types of power that just can never satiate, can never feel real, can never feel genuine. So I don't know if you have a comment on that, just as men thinking about those issues.
I have to say that being in a band is really a collective ego. Sting, however, has an ego which is completely separate. I think when I'm speaking for myself, my power within a band is 1/5 of the band, and I never ever thought of myself as powerful, and that's probably why I've never been as successful as Sting. Other people in my band have thought of themselves as being powerful, and they've got fantastic TV shows on the BBC. So it's a shared power, I think, and it's a power of the unknown, because you're absolutely right. Being on stage is fantasy.
Some of you may know that Tony Blair was a member of a band.
I've seen the footage.
Called The Ugly Rumours, and I don't think he was ever going to challenge you or Pete Townsend, but he did. I mean, he definitely kept that sort of fantasy going. In terms of, I can remember we went to the Brits, and he presented a Lifetime Achievement Award. I think it was to David Bowie, and I can remember in the car on the way back. So he's the Prime Minister, and you think that right within a country, that's the most powerful position. But he's just saying, God, I would love to be those guys. That is like, and it's like me. I mean, the greatest, I talked about some of the things I've done. I forgot to mention the one that probably the thing I've enjoyed most in all of my life was the first soccer aid and playing football with Diego Maradona. I'm sorry, it was just like the best thing that ever happened. And the thing about power, see, there at the moment, there's a wonderful cliche that Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama have all had to live with. They're the most powerful man in the world. And they don't feel like it at all. It does not feel powerful because you're dealing with so many difficult issues and you can't actually get your arms around them all the time. Obama at the moment, there he is, the most powerful man in the world. He can't get anything through Congress. He's got the Middle East there as potentially the biggest problem we've got going, and nobody can get their arms around it. So I think this thing of, and just also, I know we're here being a man, but for example, the gentleman who asked the question to say about war, the question that you just answered, we haven't surely yet forgotten about Margaret Thatcher, even though she's passed away. That was a very, very powerful political figure who was a woman. The two most powerful political figures, I think, the most effective political leader in the world at the moment is Angela Merkel, and I hope that before long she'll be joined by Hillary Clinton. You could actually find the two most powerful people in the world are going to be women before very too long. So I don't know. I think actually opportunities I think men have always had a better deal than women, and I think there's been some change in that. And if that happened, I think I could see it changing very, very, very radically. But I don't think I feel in terms of power and the pursuit of power, it's not as obvious as it seems. When you said earlier, what can we do? We all have power. How we use that power is another matter.
Can I just say, I know Jude's going to come on now and wrap up, but I've got my therapist's hat on here. The way you responded to those questions, that obviously triggered something. You didn't come for that.
Yeah, so I don't.
No, but it's just this thing again of this is what stops people from coming out and telling the stories.
I think people
it doesn't mean you can't question it, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. You know what I mean? It's that you've been brave enough to come out and share with us today.
Listen,
and
I have no objection to anybody
that.
saying anything they want. What I can't stand are people who assume knowledge based on ignorance. And I'll always challenge that wherever I see it. And I've seen one definite and one possible case of that today. So I'll always challenge it. And you're entitled to come back to me and say anything you want. And I'll never walk away from an argument. So we can have that afterwards if you want.
No fighting today, lad. No fighting. Jude.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to, if you don't mind, just reiterate something that John's implied and say something else, which is that one of the reasons why it's hard to be vulnerable in private life and in public life, and why you keep guarded, is in case somebody uses your vulnerability in a way that then harms you in other ways. So I think when you create safe spaces, which is this is trying to be, there is an attention to detail about safety, which is important. And so I would just like to give respect, very much respect, to Alastair and Chris for doing this, because just because they're public figures doesn't make it easier. In fact, in some ways, it makes it harder to negotiate that particular path. And while we're on the subject of vulnerability, if this was a women's thinking, at this point, I'd say, now, judging on statistics, X number of women will have been raped in this room, X number of women would have had violence perpetrated against them, etc., etc., etc. And if you feel that's you, I'd like to ask two things of you. One is, would you like to seek help? Because there are people here who can give it you. Or secondly, would you be prepared, not now, but at a future date, to talk about those experiences in public or in semi-public? Because the more people say this is what life is like, the easier it is for people to feel, well, that's not about shame. This is about reality. And so I am going to just say, on the basis of, statistics, some people in this room will have contemplated suicide, may still be contemplating suicide. Some people in this room will have been raped. Some people will have had violence perpetrated against them, etc., etc. You understand what I mean? Don't go away today, if any of those things are the case, without having asked for help. Because the point of this platform is, don't wait till you're in hospital. Don't wait till you hit the tree at 65 miles an hour, which is what happened yesterday. I mean, not literally, it didn't happen yesterday, but to Bobby Golding. So, and again, I stress that this is a festival that celebrates all the things that men can examine and all the potential, and it's not a therapy session. On the other hand, why waste time in life when you can take the opportunity to ask for help? So I'm just going to point out again that John's here, and Nick is over here, and Johnny's somewhere in the room over there, and anybody else who's... Jim. And Jim. Tim. And Tim over here. Tim with the fetching shirt. Just make sure you seek people out and say, look, maybe now, maybe another time, just like to, whatever. Or you can email us and say, can you pass my email on? So I just wanted to say that because it's important. And on the issue of power and influence, you might not feel you have power, but I know that a lot of people have influence. And I'm just in the middle of watching a group of people who have apparently no power, but a lot of influence, because what they're talking about matters so much to them. And so you can get together and make things happen, so that what Alice is saying is you can create a tipping point of change just because enough people gather around and become part of that story. So we're now going to take sort of 20 minutes in which you can sit at your tables and just throw up some of the stuff that came up, go to the toilet again, obviously, and then we're going to be joined at 22, 10 minutes later, I'm sorry, as than advertised, by Michael Kaufman. So can I just say thank you very much, Chris, John, and Alastair.